going to the church and talking to people that walk with God and love God, that should be the safest place. And many times that is the most cruel and condemning.
Hi, welcome once again to the Gary Wilkerson Podcast. Honored and thrilled to have you here with us today. Important episode as we discuss what's happening in the church today in relationship to people and the problems that they're facing. Some might call it mental health issues. Some call it the need of a pastoral care. Some have call it just some emotional problems, some psychological difficulties that we might be facing. And the question is the church equipped to handle some of these things? Now, we know, obviously, that the church can't handle every mental health issue, but can it handle the basic ones of our family life, of our personal life, of our need? That's what we're going to be looking at today in this episode of the Gary Wilkerson Podcast. The host today will be my friend, Dr. Mark Mayfield. He's a clinical therapist, a former pastor, true man of God, a man of prayer, a man of hope, a man who wants to really help people. Along with Dr. Mark Mayfield is my wife, Kelly Wilkerson. She's one of the great joys of my life. Mother of our 4 children and 9 grandchildren, and she's going to be talking partly about the role of the church in mental health, her years of experience in the church. Along with her is one of our dearest friends, Deanne Ward. Deanne has been through some difficulties. She'll be sharing that in another episode, but she's also the head of a ministry called My Hope, and it is a great place for you to get practical help if you're suffering some difficulties in your life. They're going to be talking today about some key issues, how the church can handle mental health issues, how the church can handle soul issues, heart issues, deep things that we're going through. Listen carefully. You're going to see some good things, hear some good things. God bless you.
Well, this is kind of fun. I'm sitting on this side of the table. Gary usually sits over here, so it's fun to have the two of you here to talk about something that's really important. And so just want to put that out there that if you're driving, it might be good to pull over or push pause and come back to this when you're at your home, because this is the conversation that we've been needing to have in the church for a long time. Mm-hmm. But before we do that, I would love to have my guests introduce themselves. So Kelly, I'd have you go first.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Kelly Wilkerson. I am married to Gary Wilkerson, and Gary and I have been a part of the World Challenge ministry for 43 years now. And yeah, it's awesome privilege to be sitting here next to my dear friend Deanne and across from you and to talk about what we're going to talk about today. So thank you for having me.
Well, I'll say thank you for having me. I'm going to say thank you for having me. So.
No.
No, this is great. And Deanne.
Hi, I'm Deanne Ward, and my husband and I have been in full-time ministry together for 40 years and seen a lot of things, experienced a lot of things, and had the blessing to minister to people, be ministered to by different organizations, have traveled with Gary and Kelly as a couple, individuals, and I'm excited about today's conversation.
You guys have been friends for 40 years, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I met Kelly before Matthew and I were married,
That's awesome.
And Matthew and Gary were friends before they were married.
Okay.
So we go way back.
Way back.
Lots and lots of history.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here. I know this has been a process for you both to be able to come sit at this table. And so I really am grateful for that in this conversation. It's not an easy conversation to have.
Right.
It's a necessary one. And so,
Yes.
I'm not going to speak for you. I'm just going to throw some questions out and we'll just have some conversations. But, mental health and the church, addiction and the church have been things that have been really taboo in topics. I think the church doesn't, for some reason, and we can get to that maybe later, doesn't want to touch this conversation, whether it be for fear or from stigma or from misunderstanding. But what has been your experience with mental health and addiction in your family? And I think, I'd love to hear your stories, as little or as much as you'd like to share, and just kind of begin the conversation around why we're having this conversation.
For Gary and I, for our family, because it is a family situation, it's not just one individual that you care about that is walking through a struggle. It's been addiction. Mm-hmm. And so I think the church, I think there's tons of fear. Mm. I think there is a religious spirit and a legalism that kind of takes hold and says, you have a problem, you're not praying hard enough. You have a sickness, God is punishing you.
Right.
And so that is so damaging and shaming. It just leaves you out in the cold. I mean, there's no way that the safest place on earth, and going to the church and talking to people that walk with God and love God, that should be the safest place.
Absolutely.
And many times that is the most cruel and condemning. And so it's, you're kind of stuck out in the cold. And if you dare to share, then there's, I don't know, it just feels like the gossips come out of the woodwork and the judgment is heaped on. And obviously I'm not saying like always and it's never or things like that, but it's the norm.
Well, and it's been, and you're speaking from your experience.
Right.
So
personal experience.
Yeah. And I appreciate you bringing up the term religious spirit, because I think there comes such a legalism with that when it comes to these conversations. It's interesting because I've heard this not just with this topic, but with other things that people struggle with. Like, we should be able to go to the church and we can't because of our fear. Right. But I feel like it's even more so with mental health and addiction.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Well, there's such a longing to be embraced, and we're made for community, and you want people to walk alongside you.
Absolutely.
And that nothing of that happens, You're ignored or belittled or judged. So it's very frightening.
Okay.
It's very frightening to face.
I'll come back to a question I have later on that. So,
okay.
Deanne, what about you?
For us, it was personal and family as well. And I didn't understand addiction when it first entered into our family on a personal level. I was just kind of like everybody else, where very well intending, but going, just stop.
Right.
Just try harder, just stop. If you just pray, let's pray, let's focus, let's take a walk. I didn't understand the questions behind the question, which is also the behavior behind the behavior. Like we were talking before we started, people don't start with addiction.
Right.
There's usually a stair step. There's usually some anxiety from some issue that they can't control or they can't get a handle on. Then it can go into depression. Then it can go into addiction. And then the addiction normally, 9 times out of 10 is going to lead to grief and loss, from the loss of a family, the loss of a job, the loss of friends that you care about. And you know what? Those are the places where there should, like Kelly said, the church should be the safest place to be. And it's not. It's David, her father-in-law, wrote an article after 9/11. There were 42% more people in church after 9/11 looking for hope, looking for answers. And then months down the road, there were less people in church than there were before 9/11 because the people that were in church became disillusioned.
Right.
People who went looking for hope didn't find hope. We're just not prepared. And there were people that entered my daughter's life that I trust with my whole heart they were well-intending, but they didn't do the research. I mean, I've had a family member say, do you think some of the issues can be demonic? Yes, they can. Do you think it can be oppression? Yes. Do I think it could be a chemical imbalance? Yes. But before we start just throwing out an easy answer that lets us do this and walk away, why don't we do some research?
Yep.
How does our body respond to things outside of our control? How does our brain shut down outside of our control when we put things in it? I mean, if I eat too much sugar, I'm nauseated.
Right.
It was Kelly who taught me that when she learned that, alcohol actually doesn't just kill your brain cells, it rewires pathways in your brain. I'd never heard that.
Yeah.
But I didn't hear it because I didn't need to know. Well, if you're going to be a caregiver, and I think everybody that calls themselves a believer of Jesus and a disciple should be a caregiver to some level. Some of us are going to, be the encouragement to the people who are called to the suicide victim. But be educated to the best of your ability. And right now there's so many things out there and so many resources that are free. I'm scared to death right now for the church at large COVID has actually exposed these numbers. Mental health is everywhere. And if a pastor goes, well, we don't have those issues in our church. We don't have addiction. We don't have anxiety. We don't have, well, what, you have a church of two? I mean, it's just, I don't see how that's even possible. But it's been the bridge to educate people the difference between mental health and mental illness. I didn't know the difference on that either.
Right.
Mental illness, no, you need a professional.
Yep.
Don't go to the church for that. Go to the church for your support, for your Bible study, but get professional help.
Yeah.
As far as mental health goes, we want the church to be the healthy place where when you come, you feel better than when you got there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, Matt, I mean, we've all heard the verse, I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me. Sometimes you can't.
Well, sometimes it's taken out of context.
It's totally out of context.
Right.
And, but we're so quick to quote scriptures.
Yes.
And this is what I've learned in the last few years. I'm tired of the Bible being used as a weapon.
Yep.
It's not supposed to be used against me. It's supposed to educate me and woo me closer and deeper in my relationship with the Lord and in those around me.
Yeah.
And it's your weapon against the
enemy,
Right.
not each other.
Not each other.
That's a really good point.
And that's where I was kind of curious as you both kind of walked through the journey of supporting a family member that was struggling with mental health and addiction. Let's talk. I don't want to throw the church under the bus, but I think we need to expose some of the areas that were not helpful. So let's talk about first where was the church not helpful in those areas, and where could they have been more helpful in walking with and alongside?
Right. I was uneducated.
Okay.
I mean, as a pastor of a church, I myself was uneducated, and I think just growing up, just thinking, you just bootstrap it.
Right.
And you wait on God and you trust the Lord. And, I mean, it's like that, those scriptures, they just became like bumper stickers and plaques that you would put.
That's a good visual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On your kitchen or in your car.
Right.
And it was just like, oh yeah. Because there was no authority behind it. There was no power to it. And so I know for myself as a pastor, I was part of the problem.
Okay.
Because I was not educated,
When you say educated, I appreciate that comment. But when you say uneducated, can you kind of expand on what you mean by that? It's just because I think a lot of people are thinking,
yeah,
well, I'm educated. But
I went to college.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But I'm talking about things at the heart.
Okay.
So, and I guess what Gary and I have been delving into more is story work. Like what's my story and the different chapters of it. And until I'm ready to look at that and see how that relates to me relating to other people, then I'm not going to be willing to actually connect with them.
Yeah.
Or a new word for us is attune to them and hear their story and have that place of drawing out, And so if there's deep waters there and the wise man, stirs it up and draws that out, it's not going to happen. And so I'm going to stay in a place where I'm just still tripping over the same things that I've lived out in my life until I let the Lord of Glory touch those places in my heart. And so uneducated in the sense that I didn't know that was necessary.
Okay.
I was just listening to something this morning, and he brought up Jeremiah 6:13, and he says the prophets and the priest from everybody, they're dealing falsely with the wounds of God's people. They're dealing falsely with it. So it's just kind of like, you can do all things through Christ who gives you strength. And
God won't give you anything more than you can handle, which is totally misrepresented.
And that I'm not trying to belittle that the word of God is alive and it's active and it pierces to the thought and the intent of the heart. What I'm saying is that myself, I didn't have the place or the authority or the grounding to apply that to my story.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I learn to apply that to my story, then I can address the wounds and the trauma of someone else
Mm-hmm.
and not deal with that falsely. In the Amplified, it's neglectfully, lightly trying to deal with wounds of the people.
Mm. So you kind of
And-
gloss over them
Yeah.
or push them aside. Or,
And God is saying it's the prophets and the priests, the leaders of the church are doing this.
right.
And I'm not talking about navel gazing and being so self-absorbed, because we're supposed to lay down our life.
Mm-hmm.
We're supposed to, go to the cross and become like Christ. We're supposed to bear his image.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot bear his image if I'm not going to be truthful to myself or God, like where I'm living
Right.
and how I'm addressing things. And, like we had a stillborn baby
Mm-hmm.
in 86.
Mm-hmm.
And for 12 years, I was angry at God, had not a clue. I was not in touch with that emotion because
Mm-hmm.
Christian, they're not supposed to be mad at God.
Right.
He's God. And how dare you?
Right.
But God loved me so much that he allowed me to live through that process. And then when I was ready, he could say, like, Kelly, don't you see how you're holding me in contempt
Mm-hmm.
for the loss of this baby?
Mm-hmm.
And, so when he showed me, it was like,
Right.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
And then I could repent
Mhm.
and he could touch that place.
So I'm hearing two things in what you're saying, and I think they're really powerful. Like one of them is the attunement. Attunement to ourselves and
Right.
our stories, right? And how they've shaped us and how we see the world around us and God. But I think the word attunement, it really gives me this clear picture of like we're narrow, we're focused.
Right.
We're tuning out kind of the static around us that isn't important, and we're focusing. But then when we're talking about sitting with other people,
Right.
I love that picture. I might steal it actually,
Yeah.
because it's just a beautiful thing of going. I don't know, when I struggle with mental illness in my own life, I remember people in the church would not be attuned. They would be distracted. They would be, looking 5 feet past me. They would be, that's nice. Okay.
Yeah.
And the attunement piece goes it get that picture of like this is all that matters right now, and I'm going to be there, even if it's for 5 minutes. You are all that matters right now,
Mhm.
and even if I walk away and I don't remember fully, I've given you my full attention.
Right.
I mean, that's something that you don't have to go to school for,
Yes.
right? That's
Yeah.
something that you can we can
just-
practice and be with,
Right.
but we don't do that well,
No. No,
So I love
don't,
that.
I don't think so. I know that I didn't do it well.
Right.
And of course, if I'm not willing to do work on my story, there's no way that I can draw a story out
Right.
of anyone else.
Yeah.
And
That's powerful. I love that. And Deanne, what about your experience? I mean, so talk similar, different. As far as where was the church helpful? Where was it not helpful?
You know what? There were a couple ladies that came along and really did help my son-in-law through that process.
Mhm.
But I think I'll just speak real bluntly. I think there's like I ever hold back, but I think there's a couple times where I've seen people who give and give and give and they want to be there,
Yeah.
but then they burn out because they've been manipulated.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of times we do have the Marthas and the Marys, and we do have people that are called to do those things. And I think if we could just maybe, I don't know, get a few more in our churches and get a few more in the Bible studies, so it's not what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say when I do see caregivers step up in a church, even if it's a church of 200, it's maybe 1 or 2 people.
Right.
And then they burn out.
Yep.
And then they feel guilty because they're resentful.
Mhm.
And they have anxiety because they can't make the casserole for the woman who had the baby, and they can't get the cookies to the Bible study, and they've got their kids and they've got this. And the word is very clear about taking time for ourselves.
Mm.
And that was the biggest lesson for me to learn on the other side, was that self-care is not selfish.
Right.
And it just sounds so glorious and relaxing to just, I'm just going to go away and get in the Word, or that sounds like an indulgence. Like, well, who has time for that?
Right.
You have to make time for that.
Right.
If you don't make time for that, you won't be able to stand up when it's just something that's thrown at you and not something that's deeply rooted, but an obstacle instead of a ditch.
Right. Yep.
Because we have both of those in our lives all the time. We're going to have bumps. We're going to hit a ditch. We're going to fall off a cliff. You know, there's all different, and there's different needs for those instances.
Yeah.
If I go off a cliff, I need everybody I know
To come in and
to pray and to be aware and go, okay, so,
Right.
you know, help.
Okay, so I think I'm going to ask a very blunt question, and I think I think we'll probably break this up into 2 episodes because I think this is a really good conversation, and I think what I'd like to do next episode is talk about just talking to parents and talking to moms and dads and aunts and uncles and grandparents about how to really take care of themselves in this. So let's stay focused on the church for a minute.
Okay.
Can I
Yes,
Because I know
No.
they can edit this.
Yeah.
So addressing where the church failed us and where the church helped us, I don't want to say the church failed. I want to say the church wasn't prepared, which is a
Okay.
completely different thing.
Yes.
Right.
And I do think because there's awareness now, there's trainings out there, there's
Yeah.
stuff online, there's Gary's podcast, there's newsletters, there's your stuff. You know, I want to encourage people to not go, why are we even trying? I want people to leave this going,
Yes.
I want to learn more. I
Yeah.
want to be able to be that caregiver to my neighbor,
Right.
the teacher that my kids have at preschool.
Right.
You know, I want people to leave this with more than anything of, I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
I need to look into it because I will cross paths with somebody who's going to struggle with mental health.
You will.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you're breathing, you're gonna
Yeah.
cross paths with somebody. And it's okay for us to share, hey, I'm struggling right now.
Right.
But here's the one thing that I'm trying to be very intentional on. When we circle the corner and you come out the other side, to also circle back to those people who were there with us and say, thank you.
Right.
I'm where I am because you did make me go to dinner.
Right.
I am where I am because you did make me get out of the house.
Well, I think
That gives us the energy to keep going, too, to go, oh,
Right.
thanks for closing the loop.
Well, I think it's a huge
great point.
it's a huge clarification, which I think is important because I think a lot of times we can easily throw the church under the bus. Like, you failed, you didn't. You know, we're humans.
Yeah.
We're gonna upset people. We're gonna let people down. We're gonna fail.
Yeah.
But I think it's the opportunity for growth that is really important. And I think this is where I really want to equip the church. And I know you and Gary do. I know you do.
Yeah.
And I do, right? We want to equip the church to go, let's mitigate these failures as best as possibly can, knowing that they're going to happen and knowing that
Yeah.
we'll have, grace there.
Right.
But let's do our best to really mitigate that. And I think, so, okay, let me ask this question then. What do you feel like is, when you were going through what you guys were going through and you were attempting to engage the church, what were some of those barriers that were hard to break through? Because if we have a pastor we're going to have pastors listening. So as we have pastors listening, what kind of barriers do you want them to be thinking about that might be there, whether it be psychological barriers, emotional barriers, programmatic barriers, things that they didn't do intentionally, but were barriers to receiving the support and the help that you guys needed?
Or intentional.
It could be intentional too.
How many times
Yeah.
have we known someone who, if you don't understand their behavior or they're acting out, or they might come in, if you come to church drunk or whatever, I mean, I've seen people asked to leave.
Yes. Versus, hey, come sit next to me and let's.
Yeah, or not
Yeah.
even that. I mean, can you have an usher sit with them in
Yeah.
the back?
Sure.
Get him some water.
Right.
Let's do some practical things.
Coffee, so warm up.
Let's
Yeah.
not put them back in a
Right.
car.
Right.
Let's not shame them.
Yep.
Let's get them some water. Let's know that they're safe. And then when church is over, then there's got to be somebody that you can call. You can call 911. They might be better at that point, but they felt safe.
Mm-hmm.
And you made the community safe because you actually let them stay when they were at their worst of the worst. You provided a safe place for them.
He modeled it.
You modeled it.
Yeah.
And I don't see that very often.
No.
I see that,
Come put together and we'll be okay. But if you're not put
Yeah.
together, then
You're in counseling and you have some addiction issues. We're just not sure it's good for you to be at church today around other people. You could be a negative influence. Well, then how
where else are we going to be?
shallow is your church?
Right. But I think that is the consumer Christian mentality
Yes.
right now that we are not triage units. You and I use that term all the time
Yeah.
when we're talking about stuff at My Hope, is that we want to be, how do we create churches to be the best triage units?
Right.
Well, that's going to really upset people that are coming because they want to have all their ducks in a row. So okay, that was an intentional barrier. So what are those intentional, unintentional? Like, why are we keeping the culture? And again, Big C Church, there's a lot of churches out there that are listening that are like, we do this well. Great.
Right.
Listen, and then how do we help our other community members do the same thing? But what are those things that are keeping us status quo?
Well, I just talked about something intentional, and then I have something just popped in my mind that was unintentional that happened at the church that they were pastoring. There was a gentleman who became very belligerent. He's acting, and he'd been volunteering. He had been in one of the programs. We knew him, and this Sunday his behavior is completely different.
Yeah.
He's a completely different person. And so the first response of a couple of the ushers who just didn't know were like, well, we need to call 911 or we need to call the police. He's violent. He's aggressive. And I said, well, let me go talk to him. And when you can calmly, basic things, stay calm.
Right.
Don't make them think you're reacting or there's going to be a consequence.
Or a conflict.
Yeah. Lower your voice. And we talked a while. And not that I had the magic bullet, because he did lay down on the floor, cross his arms, and I'm not going anywhere. I said, that's okay. Well, then I'll just sit here with you for a while. Someone else, fortunately, had the wherewithal to call his wife, say, he's acting out of character. Is there anything we need to know? And she starts crying and says, well, he'd quit taking his meds. The fact that we called her and said, we are so sorry.
Yeah.
What can we do for you? We know what to do for him now. What do we do for you?
Right.
And able to get him the right care. He's not embarrassed.
Right.
He got the help, and then she came back to church because it was just a matter of just slowing down enough to go, this is not normal behavior for this person.
Right.
And that's what we want to do. If they have abnormal behavior, I think it's easy to just go, they must be having a bad day. Me too. See you later.
But I think the big part is that we don't. This is where I think the church is lacking, is the education piece, right? They don't know what to look for.
Right.
They don't know what kind of questions to ask, and then they don't have a 2 to 3 step process of, okay, if this happens, we don't escalate it. We let him sit on the floor. We sit with him. We call somebody. We have somebody on the they call somebody that can come and help. We get the bigger picture.
Right.
We react, and I think that's what I'm hearing from the both of you, and just my passion too, of how do we equip the church to make better decisions around in the moment things, and know what to look for depression, anxiety, suicidality, homicidality, all those kinds of things that we don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. We should be.
Right.
And we should be doing it well, and then we should be, building those resources around us. So I love that example. I just don't think that's common sense.
But it can be if we slow down.
Okay, talk more about that.
If you're in such a hurry to get to the next thing and you see somebody in crisis, human nature is to keep going.
Yeah.
Because our first thing is self-preservation.
Mm-hmm.
Or self-preservation followed by I'm not equipped.
Yeah.
Not my problem because I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Right.
But the first thing is slow down and listen, because here's what I know that I know that I know. I've been in ministry long enough, I've walked with the Lord long enough that when I don't know and I slow down and quiet myself long enough to go, God, what are you saying? What do we need to do? He has never failed to give me an answer.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. He wants us to be there for one another. So if you don't know what to do, if you just stop and go, okay, God, what do we do? He's faithful to tell us what to do.
Yeah.
And it typically won't be throwing a passage of scripture at somebody.
No.
It'll be sitting with them, listening, asking good questions,
Yeah.
loving on them. I think this is really good conversation. I think if I was listening, I might be going, okay, this is a great philosophical conversation. This is a great practical conversation. But how do we make it actionable? And I think, we'll continue the conversation, in more depth next episode. But as far as what does the church do? Because I know, Gary's got, and you have a lot of great pastors and followers on this podcast that are in the thick of it, and they're listening weekly, and they're wanting to implement these things and that kind of stuff. So, what would be some practical ideas a story perspective, from a pastoral perspective, from a ministry perspective, like what do we do now? Okay, like yes, everything we're saying we want to have in our congregation, we want to have in our church.
Right.
But we don't know. It's more overwhelming to go, where do we start? How do we start? Where do we begin? What would be some good advice, some practical advice that you both would give?
Well, I guess for me, it's helped me to seek out things that help to draw a story out of me. And so, there's some great resources. You have great material that you can offer people, Mark Mayfield, Mayfield Counseling, and Adam Young has Dan Allender, so there, and I think
John Eldridge.
Yes, John Eldridge. So there's materials there to introduce story work to people. It was like, if you take a hypothetical that a young man, a young woman, they decide that they want to be a pastor. So they want to be a pastor not because God called them to be, but it looks good.
Sure.
People need them. They love solving problems.
Needs are being met through...
Right.
Yeah.
The person's needs are being met through serving and having a following.
Yep.
And so that's so upside down. So they're supposed to give their life for them. And they're supposed to be serving the people that they're caring for. But they can't if they don't know what drives them and motivates them to do the things that they're doing.
Right.
So I just as a resource, I would encourage leaders, ministry leaders, pastors to do story work.
I know we could probably put some resources in the show notes for people, links and that kind of stuff,
That'd
which would be
awesome.
great.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say is really important, and I tell this to a lot of people that I work with, is you can't go any farther with somebody than you've gone yourself.
Absolutely.
And I'm not saying you have to go through the exact same thing. You don't have to have, because that's not realistic. But it's, how far have I gone in my own journey?
Right.
How far have I looked inward?
Right.
How far have I looked upward? How far have I looked, all these kinds of things, right? And so I think as a pastor that's listening, the first step would be to just evaluate your own self.
Right.
Because I think a lot of times as the pastor goes, so goes the congregation. Let's just be really honest, right? That's a hard statement, I think, sometimes. But when we see churches thriving, it's a lot of because of the leadership and the vulnerability of the pastor. And we see churches that aren't. Right. And they could be huge mega churches and they're not thriving because of the way leadership is. So it's look inward. And I think then what I've learned from you and Gary a lot, you speak from that vulnerability, you speak from that experience, with boundaries, obviously, but you speak from those pieces, and that's contagious, right? Yeah. And I think that's a beautiful picture versus, I think everybody wants a step 1, step 2, step 3. I could check the box. Yeah. And that you meet, I always tell people,
life is messy.
You meet one person with an addiction, you meet one person with an addiction, you meet one person with depression, one person, so it's, there's no formula, which can be scary for a church. But I love that picture. What about you, Deanne, as far as?
If I could encourage pastors, I would say find 1 or 2 people that you can be completely vulnerable with.
As a pastor.
Yes.
That's scary.
Without judgment.
Okay.
So you're going to have to pick them carefully.
Yes.
And then the flip side of that is, if you're listening and you're and you want to be that person, be that person.
Right.
Be that person that people, when they come to you, they know you're not going to share their story. You're not going to judge them. Yep. You're not going to give them an answer. You're going to be able to listen and just let them do it. And those relationships grow. We have that with them. They can tell me anything, and I'm just like, okay, been there, done that. Right. And she can advise. It's not, oh gosh, how did that happen? We live in a broken, sinful world.
Yes.
You forget that part.
Yep.
Broken, sinful world. But if we have relationships where I can just go, I don't need you to fix it.
Yep.
And I don't need a scripture verse.
Yep.
I just need to know that I can process with you safely.
Without you looking at me sideways or wanting to run the opposite direction. Or,
There was a book that Harvard did years ago about counselors and the need and the uprising and the numbers of increasing all the time. Well, you're a professor, you know this.
Yes.
You graduate so many a year. They said if people had 1 to 2 friends that trusted 100%,
Yep.
walked through life without judgment, counselors wouldn't have a job.
And that's the goal.
It is the goal, and it's true.
I tell my students that all the time. Like,
Yeah.
hey, how do we equip and empower the church to do this well? Because if we did, we'd be out of a job.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
You don't have to have a degree. I mean, we have talked about researching and being
Yes.
educated.
Informed,
Yeah. Informed.
But it's also just as important to be empathetic, to listen without judgment, and to not feel like we have to fix them.
Right.
Women have my DNA, and I know Kelly's, we're nurturers, we're fixers. We want to hear about it, go back and research it, and come back and give you the answer because we want you whole.
Yeah.
Not fixed,
The whole.
because if it's fixed, it can be broken.
Right.
But whole.
I like that. Well, I think that is such an important reminder that you don't need to, with severe and persistent mental illness, with severe addiction, yes, you need like education.
Yeah.
Let's just call it that. But for people that are struggling, for caregivers that are struggling, for parents that are
Right.
struggling, for, situational depression, anxiety, that kind of stuff, I joke. I said, the secret is unconditional positive regard, no judgment, empathy. You don't fix, you just listen.
Yeah.
And our presence, the way God designed us is that our presence actually doesn't fully reach its potential unless we're in a trusting relationship with somebody else. So our brain is not functioning the way it needs to
Right.
unless we're a trusting, safe relationship.
Right.
Think about how many people's brains are not in alignment with the way God designed it because we
Right.
don't have that one or two people.
Right.
I think Gary talks about this, right? Of somebody asked him once about, are there 5 people that you can trust, call and trust implicit, and when he said that a couple months ago, I'm like, oh, do I have that? Like, it's just a good reminder.
Yeah.
And I do,
Yeah.
which is great. But it was just like taking stock of that.
Right.
How many pastors don't?
Don't. Yeah.
How many
They
pastors
don't feel safe.
How many pastors' spouses
Mm-hmm.
don't?
Yeah.
Right? Because they don't feel safe. And that's where I love the work that we're doing with My Hope Global
Yeah.
and having that Christian Counselor Network is sometimes it's a paid friend for the time being
Right.
that takes that first person.
Yeah.
And if they're a good paid friend, if they're a good counselor, they're going to go, okay, we need to take me off the list
Mhm.
and we need to add 5 people outside of here
Right.
that can get you can get to a safe place. But sometimes a paid friend, I love Irving Yalom as a amazing therapist. He's in his 80s and still sees clients and that kind of stuff. But he always says, sometimes what we need is just a safe paid friend and for a time being. And so
Yeah.
I think getting past the stigma for pastors too is a big deal.
Right.
But so just as we wrap this one up, just to take away is that I think it's important for us to understand just how much our presence affects those that we lead.
Right.
And so where the church has been missing the mark, or where they've been maybe hurtful at times, is it's maybe not intentional. Maybe 95% of the time it's not intentional. It's just
Right. No, I don't think it's malicious.
no.
I just
No,
don't
it's
think they
well-intended.
know.
It's
Yeah.
well intended. It's just I think it's just misinformed.
Right.
I don't like using the word ignorant, but I think in some ways there's some ignorance there of I just don't know that I don't know.
Right.
And so how do we help educate?
Right.
Um,
Or I'm too busy to know.
Or I'm too busy to
Yeah.
know. Or I'm putting priority on things that maybe aren't
Right.
what they should be
Yeah.
prioritized.
I think we fall short of understanding the power of the ministry of presence
Yes. Amen to
and
that.
how much it ministers to somebody when you're just there with them.
Yep.
I mean, Matthew's quoted, he's like, we're my 3 friends like Job that'll just sit here and not say anything.
Right.
We're a society that wants to give you the book,
Yep.
send you a podcast and fix it. And that's fine too. But there's times where you just have to be there. And you don't have to have the answers. Just show up, be there, sit with them,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
minister through showing up in the,
it's not an
being
either
present.
or. It's a
Yeah.
both and.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, compassion is coming into the pain of the other person.
Yes.
Right.
And this morning in my devotions, it was 1 Corinthians 1 through 3.
hmm
And so I just saw it in a whole different light today, because it talks about like if I can speak every language.
hmm
And so like what are some of the languages of the heart that maybe my children were going through while they were in addiction
hmm
that I was not aware of?
Right.
or even if I could speak that language,
Yep.
but I wasn't loving them, it would just have been so irritating to them. It just would have been that gong and that symbol. And so it just goes, if you can prophesy and you have all of God's wisdom and I can see way into the future, and I can say, hey, like this is for you and that's for you and this is gonna happen, but I don't love them.
There's no point.
There's no point. And even to have that faith to move mountains in the situation, in the addiction, in the brokenness, in the woundedness, but I'm not loving.
Yeah.
It's not going to be one thing.
Man, that's
one thing.
Message for our society right now, isn't it?
Yeah.
That love covers all. And it's the foundation.
Right.
Each week, this podcast reaches thousands of listeners. This critical work is made possible by the generous contributions of individuals like you who believe in World Challenge's mission. Thank you for listening and supporting World Challenge, transforming lives through the message and mission of Jesus Christ.